Welcome back. Jimmy is here, the Kitty Club is here, and Wolfie is here to listen to, I believe this is part 16 of Avril Crump and her amazing clones, published by Orchard Books, which is an imprint of Scholastic, who have generously given us permission to read books to you without violating copyright laws. Okay, so when we left off, Boney and Mr. Dog were trying to find their way to Avril and Dr. Weatherby, but they got a little lost, if you remember. Hi, Izzy. And so they're trying to find their way. And meantime, Avril and Gideon have, not Avril, Avril and Dr. Weatherby have taken off towards Retchford to find the clones, and on their way back, they literally ran into Lionel, and Lionel recognizes Avril and he joins them. So now they're all looking for the clones. Avril was in a state of total agitation as Lionel followed Gideon's van at a distance on the winding road. Oh yeah, remember they passed them on the road? "Don't get too close," she said. "We mustn't let him see us." "I'm intrigued, Dr. Crump. Do you actually have any kind of plan? Or are we just going to follow this madman until he leads us to the clones and then ask him very nicely if he'll let us have them back?" Avril ignored Dr. Weatherby and kept her eyes on the vehicle in front of them. It took a very sudden left, turning onto a track almost completely hidden by a cluster of trees. Lionel followed. "Lights off," Avril said. Lionel obeyed, watching the small red taillights ahead intently. The road was extremely narrow and very difficult to drive along in the pitch blackness. There were deep potholes and sudden sharp bends, none of which improved Dr. Weatherby's temper in the slightest. "This is agony," he groaned. "Let's just do what I said earlier, call the police and report Blute. Then we can all go home and let them sort this mess out." "I told you, not until we have the clones back." Avril was furious. "They're my friends. I'm not going to let Gideon or the police or the board of directors take them away from me. And if you don't like it, you can get out now and find your own way out of these woods." She blinked back, enormous round tears of exhaustion. Her eyes blurred for a moment, and she could not see Gideon's taillights. She rubbed them furiously with her fists, then stared out the windshield again. "Look out!" she suddenly screamed. For the second time in minutes, Lionel slammed on his brakes and swerved. He had seen what Avril had seen, and not a moment too soon. And we'll find out what that is as soon as we take a little break to watch the adorable kittens giving each other baths. Aww, you're so sweet. Okay, let's go back to the story. Roadhog! Illuminated by pale moonlight, two figures lay sprawled out in the middle of the track where they had thrown themselves as the car swerved around them. "What do you think you're doing driving without lights?" snarled one. "Come on, Boney, get up. We'll have to keep going." "But, Mr. Dog, I'm most dreadfully shaken," replied the other. Avril sprang out of the car. "Bonaparte," she said. "Augustus! Lady Avril and Mr. Lionel." "A roll call," Dr. Weatherby said. "How useful." "But where's Edna?" "Murderer!" Augustus hurled himself at Avril, biting and growling. "What have you done with her? What have you done with Eddie?" The dog was too enraged to notice that Avril was not fighting back. "And you," he turned on Lionel, "you traitor." "Art thou in on it too, Mr. Lionel?" Bonaparte gazed at the old man in sorrow. "Lady Avril and Mr. Lionel, our greatest friends, become our greatest enemies." "No, no," Lionel said. "You've got it all wrong. This is the real Avril. The other one's a clone." "Oh yeah? Then what's he doing with you?" Augustus glowered at a smirking Dr. Weatherby. I thought he was the bad guy. Well, he isn't very nice. Avril was distracted, worried by Eddie's absence. But he's not really a bad guy. He's just a pompous bore. I'm sorry, Raymond, she responded to his furious sputter, but you know it's true. She took a step forward. I can't believe I found you. I've been so worried. And now we will take a brief break to witness the Gatos and their WrestleMania session. It's turned into more of a slap fight. All right, that's enough of that. Back to the story. Okay. Let's see. Bonaparte shrank back from her. Mr. Dog, he whimpered. Is it truly Lady Avril? Avril felt sick. It's me, she said. Surely you can tell. Augustus eyed Avril. You look just like the other one. For Pete's sake, is the concept of cloning completely foreign to you people? Dr. Weatherby stamped back into the car and slammed the door. He's right, Lionel said. Of course she looks like the evil Avril, but look beneath the surface. Augustus looked deep into Avril's frightened eyes. For a long moment, neither of them blinked. Okay. Augustus turned around and padded toward the car. Point taken. Oh, Lady Avril! Bonaparte's embrace as he flung himself at her was heartfelt and bone-crushingly tight. She hugged him back as hard as she could. There is so much to tell thee. I'm sure, Bonaparte. Not wanting to let him go, Avril began to drag the clone to the car. And I want to hear every word, but we must hurry. We've got to find Edna. Now that the other two were there again, safe and sound, there was an even bigger hole where Eddie should have been. The memory of finding the little girl alive after the explosion in Lab 1 came rushing into Avril's head. She was praying that this time she would be that lucky. Do you know which way she was taken? Augustus gestured into the darkness. Avril and Lionel waited eagerly. Well, it's certainly in that general direction. Slightly flustered, he rolled down a window. Is it too much to expect a little air conditioning? You'll have all the air conditioning you want, Augustus. Lionel shut his door, started the engine, and put his foot down. The icy wind blasted its way into the car. We have no time to lose. Chapter 19 is called The Dove and the Vulture. Gideon parked his white van between two overhanging trees. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror before climbing out. As handsome and flawless as ever, he smiled. Then he began to walk toward the oak stump. Finally, as Avril too saw him approach, she struggled to her feet. I've been freezing out here. Gideon glowered at her. You disobey my simple instructions to bring Dr. Seducta back with you. You idiot. I had to send security out to St. Swithin's to find her. The state she was in, she might have given everything away. She's completely cuckoo. Keeps repeating the words, my name is Mr. Dog, over and over again. I'm dispatching her to room 237. She is of no use to me anymore. So where is the girl? Avril too stepped aside. Gideon looked down at Eddie. Eddie looked up at Gideon. Well, he said, hello. Despite her fear and confusion, Eddie had been thinking very clearly for the last half hour, since Avril too had tied her up. When the mystery visitor arrived, she would talk to him, reason with him, try to persuade him to let her go. But now, as she gazed into these glacial green eyes, all coherent thought was drained out of her. She was too terrified even to speak. Dunno what's gotten into her, Avril too yawned. Usually you can't shut her up. She looked greedily at Gideon's bag. I don't suppose you brought any snacks, did you? No, just asking. Gideon produced a slim flashlight from his pocket. He shone it into Eddie's eyes with slightly trembling hands. "Remarkable," he breathed. "To think my Mark I replication chamber could produce a non-viable like this." "Who are you?" Eddie had found a very small voice. "I'm your creator, my dear." "You're Professor Blott?" "Blute," said Gideon. His lips tightened. "Blute." This was the man who had created her, the one who was going to experiment on her. "What do you want with me?" she stammered. "And the others?" "Oh, the others are just waste products, my dear. Filthy mongrels, not worth a moment of my valuable time. Not like you. Now you," he shined his flashlight again, "are the most interesting specimen I've seen in some time. I'm almost proud of you," he added, so quietly that Eddie could hardly hear him. "I'm not a specimen." Eddie wriggled her freezing hands and feet. "What have you done with Augustus and Bonaparte?" "Get my bag from the van," Gideon ordered. "Avril, too. I want to have a closer look at this." "Get it yourself, why don't you?" the clone grumbled. Eddie could hardly believe Avril, too, was speaking to Gideon like this, as though she were not afraid of him at all. Why couldn't she just stay quiet? This sort of talk was sure to provoke a man like him, and Eddie did not want to see him get angry. She caught her breath as Gideon looked up and fixed his icy gaze on the complaining clone, but Avril, too, just rolled her eyes and lumbered off toward the van. "We won't take you to the medical center just yet," he said, turning back to Eddie. His voice was very soothing. "It's rather naughty of me, but I simply can't resist taking a few samples here and now." He looked as if he expected Eddie to share his pleasurable anticipation. Eddie struggled again. "What do you mean, samples?" she cried. "Let me go! You can't do this to me! I'll tell the police about this! Kidnapping is against the law, you know!" Gideon looked genuinely puzzled. "But I'm not breaking any law," he said. "You didn't think you were human, did you?" "I am a human!" Eddie glared at him. Gideon began to laugh. "It's true," Eddie said over the laughter, though her defiance was rapidly ebbing away. "I may not be exactly normal, like other children, but I exist now, and you can't just throw me away. Augustus and Boney, too. You're the one who's inhuman." Gideon stopped laughing and looked at her for a long moment. "A clever girl," he murmured. "Naturally." Then he leaned very close and whispered into her ear. "My dear, you are just a specimen for my lab, pure and simple. Never make the mistake of thinking otherwise." He drew back, picked up her bound hands, and began to examine them carefully. He did not look at her face again. "And don't imagine telling the police anything. There won't be much left of you by the time we're finished in the medical center, and then we'll just toss the remains into room 237 with your friends, and no one will be the wiser." "Room 237? Eddie swallowed. "Is that the room in the bunker? What happens there?" Gideon did not reply. Avril, too, was trudging back with his black leather bag. He began to unpack it on the cold forest floor, a small portable microscope, a box of glass slides, a test tube, a scalpel. "Where to begin?" He picked up the scalpel. "Just a little blood, I think," he mused. "You wouldn't." "I assure you, my dear, that I would." Gideon was still examining the scalpel. He did not seem to want to look directly at her. "We need information from ones like you. I am very close to eliminating all the defects from my clones. As you are one of my very earliest models, your specimens will be particularly useful. I can use them to see how far the technology has come." "But you can't just cut me into pieces," Eddie pleaded. "You made me. You can't destroy me." Gideon jolted slightly. "I will do whatever is necessary," he said. Suddenly, he turned to face her again and shone the silver ring on his right hand straight into her eyes. "Do you see this?" he said. "The dove and the vulture. Mayan legend tells of a great flood, probably Noah's flood. After the rains had stopped, Noah sent a dove out to find dry land, the new world. The dove flew across the water until one day it did reach land. But it was starving after long months of rain, and none of its usual food was to be found. So the dove defied all the laws of nature. It began to feast on the flesh of the drowned animals, whereupon it turned into a beautiful vulture, the ruler of the skies. He pulled his hand away and spoke very softly. I am like that dove. I will challenge nature to create my brave new world, and I will rule. Continuing to stare into her mismatched green and amber eyes, he twirled the scalpel elegantly between his fingers. Yes, he said, I think we had better begin with a little blood. He raised the scalpel. Wait! The scalpel hovered in midair. Wait! Eddie repeated, hopeless as this seemed. Her survival instinct was razor sharp. We've left clues all over town. If you kill me, the police will know I disappeared and they'll come after you. Gideon's lips curled into an almost admiring smile. Really, a very intelligent specimen. It's true, Eddie yelped as the scalpel moved closer. The police will find out everything. Gideon's smooth brow, reflecting the moonlight, creased very slightly. I'm willing to take the risk. Once you cut me up, you won't be able to change your mind. Good point, Avril said. She had given up all hope of getting back to the manor and was munching on a frosty twig. Think you should listen to her. Not so clever now, are you, Mr. Perfect? Quiet, Gideon snapped, furious that his concentration had been broken. This will only take a couple of minutes. Couple of minutes too many, if you ask me. Annoyed by the lack of food, Avril, too, was feeling mutinous. It's freezing, she added, slapping her arms against her sides, and I want dinner. If you do not shut up, Gideon said, you will be dinner. Hey! Avril, too, did not take kindly to this threat. She placed her hands on her hefty hips and stared down at Gideon through narrowed eyes. Watch it, pal! Eddie's whole body tensed. Watch it, pal? She could not understand why the clone was acting with such bravado, with a man as dangerous as Blute, but it seemed like complete insanity. Gideon did not even look up. Be careful of how you speak to me. Careful? Avril, too, hopped gleefully up and down. Ooh, you're one to talk about being careful. Silence, Gideon thundered. I'm about to proceed with the draining. No, Eddie begged, squeezing her eyes shut. Please, please. Don't you worry, dearie, Avril, too, bared her teeth at Eddie in an experimental smile. I'll bet you $1 million he won't do it. He's genetically programmed not to harm you, you see. She rummaged in her pocket and brought out the sheet of paper she had taken from the document storage room earlier, unfolding it with theatrical deliberation. Let's just see what we have here. Gideon dropped the scalpel and dived at Avril, too, before she could utter another word. They rolled across the clearing, struggling with each other like wild animals. Eddie, who was still shaking from her close brush with death, managed to crane her neck to see what was going on. The fighting pair rolled out of her eyes' view, and she could not crane any higher or hear what they were hissing at each other. However hard she tried. Give me that! Gideon covered Avril, too,'s mouth with one hand and grabbed the paper with the other. How dare you go through my private documents? How dare you? Like I said, the clone shoved his hand away. You should be more careful, especially with a big secret like this. What would people think if they knew you were about to dissect your own flesh and blood? Oh my gosh. Gideon clamped his hands across her mouth again. She's not my flesh and blood. Just because she's got some of my DNA, that doesn't make her my flesh and blood. The clone's reply was muffled until she managed to roll out from Gideon's grasp. Should have thought about that distinction 15 years ago then, shouldn't you? She waved the paper mockingly as Gideon tried to snatch it. Replication chamber Mark I, she sneered. Experiment abandoned after accidental contamination with drop of own blood. You know, I find that a little surprising. Thought someone as vain as you would have loved the idea of a bunch of your own offspring running all over the place. Or do you know something about your perfect, blonde, handsome DNA that I don't? Gideon was wild-eyed now. "Give me that!" "The thing is, you should have done more than just abandon the experiment. You should have destroyed it back then. But you couldn't, could you? Once you knew your own precious DNA was in that mix, you couldn't bring yourself to harm it. No more than you can now. You can't even look her in the eye. The other two are a different matter, of course. You only have to look at them to see they haven't ended up with the best of your DNA. Terrible mix-up, those two. So you might be able to kill them at a distance. But you can't bring yourself to do it with this one, can you? So don't think you can boss me around, pal. I've got your weak spot right here and my hot little..." Gideon finally got his hands on the paper, ripped it down the middle, and dealt Avril 2 a sickening blow to the face. "Not anymore," he spat. He ripped the paper again as the clone's head lolled. "Not any more." He stood up, smoothing his hair and catching his breath. "There was never any weak spot," he continued quietly, placing his foot on her neck. "I think you have misjudged me. I do not have a sentimental side, not even for those creatures whose miserable existence I am unfortunately responsible for." Avril 2 gurgled as he pressed his foot gently against her jugular. "I'm sorry? You will be. If you challenge me again, you will be. You are only here for as long as absolutely necessary, and you have nearly fulfilled your purpose. I do not intend to keep another one of you disgusting mongrels alive any longer than I have to. Now get up." He moved his foot and kicked her with it. "I cannot delay any longer." He turned and strode back over to Eddie. Avril 2 lay on the ground in a heap. She did not move, but she clenched a fist so tightly that her hand turned white. Eddie stared up at Gideon as he came into view again, adjusting his white lab coat. He stared back at her, his green eyes unblinking and direct this time. "Now," he picked up the scalpel again. "Where were we?" Okay, we'll stop there for tonight. Kind of a cliffhanger. As you can see, Jimmy is on the very edge of his seat. He is so excited. Right, Jimmy? Jimmy? Well, anyway, that's just how he looks when he's excited. Okay, guys, be sure to tune in tomorrow for the next episode. We might finish, or we might need 2 more of these. We'll see. Okay, I'll see you later. Bye.